Folsey, Jason La Canfora, and I like Jason a lot. One of the reasons I like him is because he ticks people off. I was told early in my career, as a writer actually, that if somebody's not ticked off at you, you're probably, at any given time, you're probably not doing your job. So I also remember Jason from when we started out on the hockey beats together, him covering the Capitals, me the Penguins. That doesn't mean I always agree with him. And one thing that bothers me is his stance on Tomlin. And he reiterated it, I think, yesterday on the Fan Morning Show. And this is the clip that got the most attention.
The grass ain't always greener, bro. It's not. And just look at all these franchises. Like, do a little study. Look at every franchise in the league, right, and their coaching history since you guys hired Mike Tomlin. How many they've been through. The best guy. What's the best record of the best? Just cherry pick. Go through every franchise and find their best guy, right, of the last 15 years and compare his record to Mike Tomlin.
Is that a challenge, bro? Because if it is, I went and did the research. And it's not a guy by guy like, who are you going to compare him to from 17 years ago, Jason? You have kids who were born then who if your first conscious memory is when you're like 5, then there were kids from 17 years ago who are now married with children of their own. But we're going to go back to then? Okay. You want to go career record. Here's where I'll meet you halfway. Some people call him Jason L'apologist. Pump, but I won't.
Brah.
So let's do this because, that to me echoes sort of the national sentiment among a lot of people. It's not, well, let's examine Mike Tomlin's record over the last decade or something. It's like, you idiots in Pittsburgh, what, you don't know how good you have it? You should feel lucky. Okay, then let's take this statistic, and you guys tell me if this is fair. I think a great way to measure coaches is playoff wins. And I'm not talking cumulative because then it's obviously skewed if you have one guy who's been in the league 10 years, another guy 3, right? How about average playoff wins per season? And I'll go for Tomlin's whole career. And I'll compare him to newbies like Zach Taylor, relative newbies like Sean McVay, and old heads like Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, John Harbaugh, Mike McCarthy, Pete Carroll, Sean Payton. We'll simply go average playoff wins per year for your whole career. And we'll do that for active coaches who have coached, let's say, at least 3 years. Does that sound reasonable to you guys?
At least 3, it's a good base.
Yes.
Okay, then here you go. Average playoff wins per season. There's 17 coaches in the NFL who have coached at least 3 full seasons. Where do you think Tomlin ranks in average playoff wins per season among those 17?
15.
I was going to say 10.
He's tied for 12th. Bro. So here's the average playoff wins per season. And again, to qualify it, it's anybody in the NFL an active coach who's coached at least 3 years, okay? Zach Taylor is averaging 1.25 playoff wins a season. Sean McVay, 1.12. Bill Belichick, 1.1. Kyle Shanahan, 1.0. Andy Reid, 0.92. Doug Peterson, 0.8. John Harbaugh, 0.73. Sean McDermott, 0.7. Mike McCarthy, 0.68. Pete Carroll, 0.65. You know I haven't gotten to yet? The guy that we should all feel lucky to have. That how dare anybody even question the idea of Mike Tomlin's future as a head coach. We're all idiots for even wondering. Sean Payton, 0.6. And then we get to 12th place out of 17. And it's Guy Lafleur tied with Tomlin at 0.5. And the only guys below him in average playoff wins per season are Mike Vrabel, Kevin Stefanski, who I think had a playoff win here, Ron Rivera, and Todd Bowles. 4 guys. Oh, and by the way, Over the past decade, Tomlin drops to 0.3 playoff wins per season. And over the past 12 years, he's at 0.25, which would be the lowest among all those guys except for Todd Bowles at 0. Be tied with Rivera, barely ahead of Stefanski. Okay? Bro?
I think Jason was listening to that. If he wasn't, he will hear it somehow, some way.
So please don't tell me or people that their opinions are ridiculous when it comes to that. The bottom line, Bob, and I don't know if you agree, I think it's a fact, is that the Pittsburgh Steelers don't win big games anymore. That's sort of a problem. They don't win big games anymore if you consider playoff games to be the biggest.
And the nature of the loss is even more bothersome because they normally get blown out of these games.
Yeah,
yes,
by giving up 40 points, and defense is getting shredded. And that's the one thing that was really Mike Tomlin's calling card. So you don't want to see those kind of situations arise. And obviously that has to be better if they're to, consider an offseason where they bring him back and add to his coaching staff or change his coaching staff. You got to get in there and do something when you're in there. You can't just get in and get eliminated in one game in an ugly fashion.
No, in fact, they're riding an NFL record streak of 3 straight playoff games, giving up 40 or more points. So, the common arguments against moving on from Tomlin, the 2 most common refrains are, who else are you going to get? To which I would say, I don't know, the next Mike Tomlin, the next Bill Cowher, the next Chuck Noll. How many coaches came to their current positions as coordinators? I would imagine there's a lot of people who could coach this team, right? And like we've said many times, I don't think anybody in their right mind would say Tomlin isn't a good coach. He is a good coach. It's just, has he run his course here? And the second refrain, Bob, that we often hear is what? If Tomlin left here, he'd be hired in 5 minutes. Well, guess what? You know who else would be hired in 5 minutes, Bob?
Just about everyone you named.
Mike McDaniel, Sean McDermott, John Harbaugh, Zach Taylor, Doug Peterson, Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Nick Sirianni, Dan Campbell, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. Would you like me to keep going? Because they'd all be hired in 5 minutes. In the NFL, even bad coaches get hired in 5 minutes when they failed in one place, like Frank Reich. So who cares if he would be hired in 5 minutes? That doesn't matter.
And here's the thing. We cite, some of the stuff that goes on with other teams. You can move on from a Hall of Fame coach, as Philly did. And twice now they've gone for Doug Peterson. He won a championship when Andy Reid couldn't.
Right.
And then Nick Sirianni is now knocking on a door. So you can do it. And Mike Tomlin is a good coach, and he's very well respected. He'll get whatever he needs. But they get to a point where, like 17 years, a long time. It's one of the longest tenured coach situations in all of football history, really. I mean, you're talking about Noll at 23. Cowher didn't last 17. If that happens, that happens. But I still am one of those people who want to believe everything has to be looked at after an entire season.
Sure.
Because this NFL is telling you that if you get into the playoffs, especially this year, you should have a chance if you're playing good football. If you're playing good football. Whether or not they can do that, I doubt, based on what we've seen, especially with 2 home losses like this. But I do think if you do get in there somehow and you're playing at a pretty good brand of football and you're healthy, you have a chance because there is no really one dominant team in the AFC this year.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that state of affairs stands to just continue the
if they got
run
in,
of mediocrity.
If they got
now,
in and won 2 playoff games, what would you think?
Think differently.
Okay,
then
that's
you think
my
differently.
point. You don't know. We'll see.
I don't. It feels like a long ways away.
It does.
If that happens, I can change my opinion. And we could have a very reasonable conversation with Lock and Four or anybody else about what the Steelers should do, and there's good points on both sides. What I object to is the idea that you're a complete simpleton and an ungrateful person if you merely think that the Steelers might have better options out there and that Tomlin has run his course. That's what I object to.
And here's what I think what happens nationally is that these guys like Lock and Four and so many others compare the Steelers to the lowest of the low. They compare them to like the Jets and the Raiders
Right.
and whatever, the Panthers, and say, look at all the instability in those organizations. And Tomlin has come in here and he's never had a losing season. They're always in it. They never fall to that standard. He's the one that keeps them to that standard, but you're comparing them to the worst in the league. You're not comparing them to the best. You're just saying that it's great that they're consistently not one of the worst. And I don't think nationally they understand, or maybe they just don't know and haven't
But I
looked.
think that's true of anyone who watches sports from a specific city. You don't see what goes on day to day to day. You see the end result.
Right.
And you look at it, oh, look at them. They're always there. Okay, that is a true statement. They are.
Well, where is there? Where is there?
Competing for a chance to get into the playoffs.
That's not a very big there.
I'm just saying.
I know. That's what they think. But I think the comeback there is, well, where is there? Because they're about to miss maybe the playoffs for the fourth time in 6 years.
Yeah.
So, Jason and other national media types, if your take is that, oh, they're a perennial playoff team, you couldn't be more wrong. And not only that, when you actually look at a simple number like point differential, and I think we can all agree that if your opponents consistently score more than you, you're probably not very good. They're about to have their third straight season in negative point differential, and they're 4th and 5. That hasn't happened. 3 in a row of negative point differential since the end of the Chuck Noll era, and 4 and 5 hasn't happened since the beginning of the Chuck Noll era.
That's exactly right.
They're just not good.
The point differential is something that not many people talk about, but it is indicative of how they're playing, that they're losing a lot of games by big numbers when they lose. Sure, some of these can go down to the fourth quarter and you can pull one out here and there, but generally speaking, you got to be better on those numbers, and that tells you more about your team.
I wonder how many national analysts just assume that they've won a playoff game since 2016.
I think a lot, and they assume that they're in more than they get in more than they don't. Not really. No, like I said, if they miss this year, that's 4 out of 6 misses. And when they do get in, they get destroyed in wild card games to the point where they're making history in the way that they give up 40 points. I don't think they know. They just don't. They just assume.
I don't think they realize
it. This is bad. This is bad football.